ActionSA has put a spotlight now on how much ministers in our government of national unity have been spending on official travel. And the number they've come up with is close to 450 million rand. What's it for? Flights, accommodation and related expenses. This in their first 18 months in office. The party says these numbers are drawn from parliamentary responses as well as its own tracking system. It reveals what they say is a wasteful use of public funds, and the context is our deep economic problems and our high unemployment rates. ActionSA's Alan Beesley is with us now to talk more. Alan, thank you very much for your time. As always, we appreciate it. So this 450 million rand number that you've come up with is you've got this GNU tracker system that you've instituted. Just talk to us a little bit about why you went about creating this tracker in the first place to monitor this type of spending.
Yeah, for ActionSA, it's critical. There needs to be accountability for the executive spending. Since the GNU has been formed, nearly 70% of political parties are in the GNU, and many parties in the GNU have actually lost their voice about this. They're very critical of the ANC ministers and deputy ministers, their travelling expenses. But since they become part of the GNU, they become part of the gravy train. They've just lost their voice on it. They basically lost their voice speaking caviar. Eating caviar and drinking champagne on international travel. It's absolutely absurd. And as you mentioned, we've got huge needs in our country. We've got more than 50% of our families going to bed hungry tonight. So this amount of expenditure is just immoral, it's indefensible, and it's outrageous.
So who was eating caviar and drinking champagne?
Well,
or is that
basically
just for, is that a metaphor or is that real? People who were ordering caviar and champagne?
No, it is a metaphor, but if you actually look at the expenditure, it could be quite real. The deputy president in Japan, he spent 950,000 for 4 nights accommodation in Japan. That's nearly 235,000 rand a night. It's absolutely ridiculous. His deputy director general went with him, and his accommodation was 35,000. So you've actually got to ask yourself, what are you getting for 930,000 for 4 nights? They could have built 4 houses for needy people, homeless people, to have a house for the rest of their lives. So it's absolutely absurd. So you've got to actually ask, what are you actually getting for 950,000 for 4 nights?
Okay, let's just say, one of the arguments might be, well, South Africa's exchange rate, this is the prestige of a country, and. How do you respond to those things? That our ministers and our government officials are representing the country on the global stage, and so they have a reputation or an image to uphold.
Yeah, it's important, and as a pragmatic, rational opposition, we say travel is important, but it's actually the extent of it. Since this GNU's been formed, we've got more ministers traveling further and more luxury. And you just take the case of human settlements. They're the worst offenders at the moment. They've spent nearly 34 million in 18 months. But we're not building houses overseas. We're building houses locally. So why does the Minister of Human Settlements and his deputies have to travel? And it's just not the ministers that are traveling. It's the deputy ministers that are traveling. And there's just zero accountability for this expenditure. There's just no value. And as I said earlier, we've got huge poverty in this country. So it just can't be justified. And the Lipters test, I always say, is if you have to pay for something yourself, how much would you pay for? I can tell you now, if the deputy president had to pay for his own accommodation in Japan, he wouldn't have spent 950,000. But because it's taxpayers' money, and every single person in this country contributes, so we're all paying for this expenditure. The poorest of the poor through VAT, through fuel levies, we're paying for this expenditure. So it's just unacceptable.
I think there's something to be said, Alan, to your point of how many people do you actually need around you, and do you need a deputy minister to travel with you? So certainly in this context, against this backdrop that you've just painted, which many of us are just living with every single day, there needs to be more austerity in the way that these trips are managed. So you've highlighted some of these specific trips costing millions for just a few days abroad. You talked about the luxury accommodation and so on, the perhaps the oversized delegations. But let's go then to the procurement controls, because somebody's signing off on this and saying, it's okay, the money's available, off you go, just make sure you can bring us the slips or whatever, I imagine. But have you uncovered any potential actual breaches of the Treasury regulations in the authorization of the spending in these trips?
No, we haven't come across any breaches, but again, that's why we're introducing legislation called Cut the Cabinet Perks Bill, because at the moment, the president just signs all this off, so that Parliament doesn't have any say, any oversight. So we're saying that's absolutely nonsense. Parliament must have oversight of the executive. So there needs to be a review of the executive handbook. So at the moment, there's just no systems in place. It's open season, and they're making the best use of this open season that they can at the moment. So that's why we're introducing two key legislations. One is cut the cabinet perks bill to control this expenditure. And secondly, we're introducing a constitutional amendment to do away with deputy presidents. I mean, deputy ministers, nobody knows what deputy ministers do. They don't know themselves yet. We've got 43 of them, and they're traveling all around the world.
All right. I want to come to in pursuing this information, or in pursuing accountability and asking people to say, show us your hand, what was the money spent on? One of the things you say is that the answers that have been forthcoming have been, well, some of them have not been forthcoming, but also they've been evasive. Just talk to us about that. Who's been avoiding really showing and being transparent about where they went, who they went with, and how much things cost?
Yeah, I mean, two prime examples are the DA ministers, Dean McPherson and Solly Malatsi. That they meant to be, DA always talk about good governance. They were the ones who had the biggest outcry. Yet when we've asked these two ministers the questions, they refuse to answer. So the question is, what are they trying to hide? Because they know that the answer is going to be. So we reported them to the Speaker's office, to the Ethics office, and there's several others. The Deputy President, since we uncovered his Japan trip, he's refusing to answer questions now. So now some of them are just stonewalling us, and if you're stonewalling us, and not stonewalling us, stonewall South Africans, because South Africans have got the right to know. They've clearly got something to hide.
We'll certainly get Solly and Dean to respond to what you're saying, and hopefully get a response from some of the other ministers that you've also talked about. You've highlighted in your report, amongst others, water and sanitation, their minister from the ANC, Pemi Majidina, an expense of around almost 30 million rand with regard to travel. The Women, Youth and People with Disabilities Minister Chikunga, at a price tag of around 25.27 million. I mean, the list is quite long. You've got Trade, Industry and Competition Minister Parks Tau. I think you mentioned that at the beginning, 2.1 million rand on just 3 nights in New York in September of 2024. And then another trip in the region of 1.5 million rand for a 1-week trip to Washington in July of 2024. So did you go ahead and look at or was it even provided, that breakdown, which is why I asked you whether the caviar and champagne thing was more figurative than literal. But have you gone through, I mean, is there detail available on exactly what some of the money is being spent on and where they could have economized, maybe not even attended some of these trips?
Yeah, so some of the ministers give us decent answers with sort of transparency, and many of them try and hide their answers in a huge amount of detail. So it's difficult to go down into the absolute detail. But again, I come back to the Deputy President, 950,000, and they break down the cost of accommodation. So every time they do a trip, they break down the cost of the accommodation, and it's absolutely ludicrous the amount of money that they're actually spending on accommodation, on travel, and also their subsistence allowance. So they don't break it down into the caviar champagne element, but if you actually look at the cost, there's no doubt that there is some of that involved.
Give us an idea of what that subsistence is like every day.
No, it's massive. It's massive, and we're talking thousands. And the one big issue that we're saying from ActionSA's perspective, it just gives a shocking example to the rest of society. The cabinet talk about the importance of people tightening their belts, but their own belts is getting looser, getting fatter. Essentially, the fat cats are getting fatter every day on taxpayers' expenses, on taxpayer, when people in our country are really battling day to day with cost of living. And that's why we're saying it is any expense, there needs to be accountability. So when these ministers come back, they should be providing accountability and saying, listen, this is how we've spent the money. This is the value that we've got for our money. So there is complete accountability and transparency in every single trip, but there's not at the moment. So we're able to ask how much they've spent. We're unable to get a detailed breakdown, but we're not getting any response in terms of actual value for money of this expenditure, whether it was actually worth the trip. And
I mean,
in
are you
most
going to go
cases, I'm
further,
sure the
Alan?
answer is.
Are you going to go further and look for that? I mean, I'm interested as a tax-paying South African on the detail, and we have the right to know that information around, you know, what things were actually on the bill, what things are on the bill, what are they spending on when they travel on the taxpayers' rands and cents. So I really hope you are going to go further as ActionSA. But you talked about introducing this legislation for the tightening of belts and so on to ensure that they are, you know, that there is austerity and that there is a real awareness of spending public money. But if your bills fail to pass, what leverage do you have to force the restraint against excess in this government of national unity? And as you say, and we'll offer them a right of reply, including, you know, ministers from the DA.
Yeah, well, we will keep on exposing it, but we actually are hoping that political parties come on board with this legislation. You know that the DA was the party that first introduced the cut the cabinet perks bill in the sixth administration, and conveniently they let it lapse when they joined the GNU. So we've improved the legislation, the cut the cabinet perks bill. We've done a lot of public participation. We've got a lot of support. We've got outer support. So it would be very, I don't know, bizarre if the DA actually voted against it, you know, and in any political party that votes against it when it gets to debate, the public needs to know who's voting against this and who continues to vote for this gravy train to continue. So we will keep on continuing to expose it. And I think the previous question you asked earlier is a very valid question. Now that we've got this detail, we need to dig deeper and see if we can get a greater breakdown of this expenditure. Because as you said, we're all paying. Your viewers are paying for it. Every single person is paying for this luxury lifestyle.
ActionSA Member of Parliament, Alan Beesley, thanks for talking to us this morning.